Let's talk about providing moral leadership and the example that we set. Speaking to young men, some of whom could certainly be fathers, in Titus 2, verse 6 and 7, he said, young men likewise exhort to be sober-minded in all things, showing thyself a pattern of good works, in doctrine showing uncorruptness, gravity, sincerity. Think about showing a pattern of good work. A pattern is something that is a consistent picture. Whether you're thinking about a lady that's at the sewing machine building a garment, or somebody that's got a blueprint over here and they're following that blueprint to build a building or a house or something like that, in those patterns you have a consistent picture. Children need to see in their fathers a consistent picture of good works, good deeds done for the sake of others. And that takes time. That takes energy. And that takes unselfishness. And that pays grand dividends. You need to show moral leadership in the demands that they have of their children. Proverbs 29 and verse 15, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. Do not leave your children, fathers, to their own devices, but guide them. Set high demands for them. Have high expectations of them. And insist that they meet those expectations. Well, but the wife might feel tender-hearted towards them. Might feel sorry for them, and she might not want you to do that. Okay? Endure her being disappointed with you. She'll thank you later. If you know what's right and you want to do what's right, do it. You might have people at church that give you grief. The same parents that raised you that way might get real soft-hearted in their old age, and they may come whisper to you, back off of them. They're so innocent. You do what you know is right and what you know your children need. And hold high standards. If you set them out to do a job, don't leave them to themselves in how they do that job. Go back and inspect it. Expect it to be done right. Set out an idea of discipline. In 1 Samuel 3 and 13, we read about Eli. He was a priest and judge of Israel. He said, I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. God looked at a family there that was messed up, Eli's family, and he held Eli accountable, not because his sons went astray, but because he didn't try to stop them. And those are two totally different accountabilities. I'll tell you something. One time, one of the girls was approaching motherhood, and not far from bearing their first child, and she approached me and said, Dad, it's starting to really hit me that I'm responsible to raise this child in the Lord, and they may go astray. They may do things that aren't right, and I've got to teach them, and this really worries me. Really, both the girls had this conversation with me at one point or another, but I'm thinking of the youngest one. And I said, let me tell you something. Your children are going to disappoint you. You just better get ready for it. And she stopped and she looked at me. You know how girls are, hand goes on the hip. Oh yeah, well what have I done to disappoint you? I said, how much time do you have? We're not here playing tiddlywinks. It's time to talk about how it is. And then followed these words. When your children are grown, they'll be free moral agents. You can't dictate what they'll decide. They're going to make their decisions. And those decisions may not be right. You're responsible to guide them. They're responsible for what they do with it. Eli wasn't responsible because his kids did wrong. Eli was responsible because he didn't restrain them in the wrong that they did. Our kids are going to disappoint us, and as free moral agents, they may make decisions that disappoint us. We're responsible to have done our job, brethren, as fathers to guide them as best we can. That's the part that God held Eli accountable for. In Proverbs 13:24, he that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. Teach them, correct them, discipline them with the rod of correction. Find other ways to discipline them. Punish them with labors, withdraw their privileges. Do whatever you can think of to do. You are in a two-fisted fight with the devil for the soul of your children. For crying out loud, do something. Okay? Be engaged in holding demands upon them. Proverbs 22:15, foolishness is bound in the heart of the child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. There's not some magical little creature just waiting to blossom out if you'll give them enough time. There's a vile sinner just waiting to blossom out if they're left to themselves. And it's up to the parents to give the rod of correction to drive that folly from them. In Proverbs 23, verse 13 and 14, withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with a rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with a rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell. Engage in the fight for their soul. And don't wait till they're grown to think that's when it's time. Start early. That verse we read earlier said, chasten them betimes. The word translated betimes there basically means early and often. In 2 Samuel 18 and verse 5, don't be blind to their obvious problems. Let's look at King David. 2 Samuel 18 verse 5, the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. Now let's talk about Absalom. That's David's son. What did Absalom do? Well, quite a few of you are probably familiar with the story, but in case some of you are not, let's just briefly survey what the young man did. He deliberately, slowly built influence with Israel for the purpose of overthrowing his father's rule, supplanting his role in the kingdom, and then intended to kill his father. Not exactly son of the year, but he wasn't done with that. To demonstrate what he perceived to be the totality of his rule over the household of Israel, he had him put a tent up on top of the house, and he took his dad's concubines and put them in that tent one by one, and went up there and went in unto them for everybody to see that that was happening up there. To just demonstrate, this is my house now. A long ways from being son of the year. That's who David is talking about, saying, be gentle with him. That had some recoil to it. In 2 Samuel 19, verse 4 through 6, Absalom eventually died. The king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son. And Joab came into the house to the king and said, Thou hast shamed this day the faces of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life, and the lives of thy sons and thy daughters, and the lives of thy wives and the lives of thy concubines, in that thou lovest thine enemies and hatest thy friends. For thou hast declared this day that thou regardest neither princes nor servants for this day. I perceive, if Absalom had lived and we all had died this day, then it had pleased thee well. Ouch. Look, was David right to be grieved at his son's death? Absolutely. Who wouldn't grieve over the loss of their son in any circumstance, and certainly in circumstances like this? But what was the problem that his friend pointed out to him here? He looked so blindly at Absalom's obvious error and just grieved that he met a just end that it began to look like he was more interested in the well-being of his guilty son than he was all those who did the right thing and were loyal to the king. Now think about that in the realm of fatherhood. I know they're precious. I know you care about them. But if you really, really love them, do not blind yourself to their obvious problems. Don't do it. Be willing to see the wrong that they've done, and you take your part in addressing that.